The last thing I said to my mother was that I never wanted to see her again. 3 hours later, while a storm swallowed the coastline, I received a message that would make me question everything I believed about my family. Rain struck my windshield in violent waves as I drove through the darkening evening. The weather forecast had warned everyone to stay indoors, but I could not bear another minute inside that house. My hands tightened around the steering wheel while flashes of lightning illuminated the road ahead. Every mile between me and home felt like a statement. Every mile felt like proof that I was finally choosing myself. I am Elena Hartwell. I worked as an archivist at a local history museum. Most days, I spent my time preserving letters, diaries, photographs, and records that told forgotten stories. I loved my job because it reminded me that every family leaves traces behind. Sometimes those traces reveal love, sometimes they reveal regret, and sometimes they reveal secrets. For years, I suspected my own family was hiding something from me. My father, Daniel Hartwell, disappeared from my life when I was 12 years old. According to everything I had been told, he chose to leave. My mother rarely spoke about him. Whenever I asked questions, her answers were short and uncomfortable. Eventually, I stopped asking because silence seemed easier than disappointment. As I grew older, I convinced myself that the missing pieces did not matter. I was wrong. 3 weeks earlier, I had been helping my mother clean the attic before the rainy season began. She had injured her ankle and could not safely climb the narrow stairs. While moving old blankets and storage boxes, I discovered a small wooden chest hidden behind a stack of forgotten belongings. The lock was broken. Inside were photographs, legal documents, and several unopened letters. Every envelope carried my name. Every envelope carried my father's handwriting. I remember staring at them in complete disbelief. Some letters looked old enough to have been written more than a decade earlier. Others appeared newer. The dates stretched across years of my life. Years I believed he had forgotten me. Before I could open a single envelope, my mother entered the attic. The moment she saw the box, her expression changed. A look of panic crossed her face before she quickly took the letters from my hands. She told me those papers involved difficult family matters and insisted we discuss them another day. That explanation only made me more suspicious. Over the following week, I could not stop thinking about those letters. I imagined all the conversations I never had. I imagined birthdays, graduations, and milestones that my father might have wanted to share. Every unanswered question grew larger inside my mind. Working in a museum had taught me that incomplete information often creates false conclusions. Historians rarely understand an event after reading a single document. They compare sources, examine context, and search for missing details before reaching conclusions. Unfortunately, emotional pain does not always allow the same patience. When feelings become involved, people often build entire stories from fragments. Without realizing it, I was doing exactly that. A week later, while my mother attended a medical appointment, I returned to the attic. The box remained exactly where she had hidden it. This time, I opened every letter. I spent nearly 2 hours reading them. My father wrote about birthdays he missed and schools I attended. He mentioned achievements he somehow knew about and described memories from my childhood with remarkable detail. Every letter carried the same message beneath the surface. He missed me. He loved me. He hoped we would meet again. By the time I finished reading, confusion had transformed into anger. I convinced myself that my mother had stolen years from me. The evidence seemed undeniable. The letters existed. They were addressed to me. Most had never been opened. I believed I had discovered the truth. 2 days later, I confronted her. The argument happened in her kitchen while heavy clouds gathered outside. I placed the letters across the table and demanded answers. My mother looked shocked, then exhausted. Several times she tried to explain, but I interrupted before she could finish. Years of frustration poured out of me faster than either of us could control. The conversation became uglier than I intended. I accused her of lying. I accused her of hiding my father from me. I accused her of deciding what parts of my life I deserved to know. When she finally raised her voice, it was not out of anger. It sounded more like heartbreak. That only made me angrier. Before leaving, I told her something I had never planned to reveal. A museum in another country had offered me a position. If I accepted it, I would leave within 2 months. At that moment, I was seriously considering the move. I wanted her to understand that her choices had consequences. Looking back, I realize I was preparing to abandon far more than a town. I was preparing to abandon my family completely. As I walked toward my car, I heard the front door open behind me. My mother called my name. Only once. I did not turn around. Later, that small moment would hurt more than the entire argument. Now, as rain covered the highway and thunder rolled across the coast, I replayed everything in my head. Part of me expected my mother to call. Another part feared she might. My phone remained silent while the storm grew stronger around me. An hour later, I arrived at a small inn overlooking the ocean. Emergency alerts flashed across televisions in the lobby, warning residents to remain indoors. The owner seemed surprised that anyone was traveling in weather like this. I carried my bag upstairs and stood beside the window. Below me, waves crashed violently against black rocks. Wind pushed sheets of rain across the shoreline, erasing the horizon completely. The farther the storm spread, the less I could see. Looking back, that felt strangely familiar. For years, I had moved through my family's history the same way. I saw fragments and mistook them for the whole truth. As darkness settled over the coast, my phone finally vibrated. The message came from a number I did not recognize. I opened it immediately. The text contained only one sentence. Before you read another letter, you deserve to know why your father never mailed them himself. Before I share the rest of story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. The message remained on my screen while rain continued to lash the window behind me. I read the sentence several times, hoping another explanation would follow. Nothing appeared. There was no introduction, no signature, and no clue about who had sent it. A sensible person would have ignored it. Unfortunately, curiosity had already shaped too many of my decisions. I replied and asked who they were. Response arrived almost immediately. The sender introduced himself as Owen Mercer. At first, the name meant nothing to me. Then he explained that he had been one of my father's closest friends during the final years of his life. More importantly, he revealed something that immediately changed my understanding of the situation. After our argument, my mother had contacted him. She knew I had discovered the letters. She also knew he possessed records and information that she did not. When I stopped answering her calls and disappeared during the storm, she became worried. Owen decided to reach out before I made decisions I might later regret. That detail unsettled me. For days, I had imagined my mother as someone hiding the truth. Yet even after our terrible argument, she had still been trying to help me find answers. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind pushed against the building hard enough to make the glass vibrate. Emergency alerts warned residents to remain indoors until morning, but Owen insisted there were things I needed to know before reading any more letters. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. His home sat near a small harbor about 20 minutes away. The drive felt dangerous. Rain reduced visibility to only a few yards ahead. Waves exploded against the coastline whenever lightning illuminated the darkness. Several roads were partially flooded, forcing me to drive carefully through standing water. The farther I traveled into the storm, the less I could see. Years later, I would remember that journey as more than a drive through bad weather. For most of my life, I had moved through my family's history in exactly the same way. I saw fragments of information through emotional fog and convinced myself I understood the entire landscape. The storm outside was becoming a reflection of the one inside me. When I finally arrived, Owen welcomed me into a modest house overlooking the harbor. Fishing boats rocked violently in the water below. Inside, however, everything felt calm. Books lined the walls, old photographs filled several shelves. Many of those photographs included my father. Seeing them stopped me in my tracks. In every image, he looked older than the man I remembered. Time had continued moving forward without me. His hair had become thinner, his face carried more lines, yet his smile remained familiar. For a moment, grief replaced anger. Owen noticed my reaction and offered me tea before we sat down. Over the next hour, he told me stories about my father that I had never heard before. He described a patient man who worked hard, helped neighbors, and spoke proudly about his daughter whenever he had the chance. According to Owen, my father never stopped loving me. That information should have brought comfort. Instead, it created confusion. If he loved me so much, why had he stayed away? Learning often requires us to challenge ideas we have carried for years. Students frequently struggle when new information contradicts something they believe to be true. Their first reaction is usually resistance, because accepting a mistake can feel uncomfortable. Real growth begins when we become willing to question our own certainty. For the first time, I began questioning mine. Eventually, Owen opened a drawer and removed a thin folder. Inside were medical records. The moment I saw them, my stomach tightened. The documents revealed that my father had been diagnosed with a severe neurological illness shortly before he left our family. The condition affected memory, judgment, and cognitive function. Several specialists predicted a rapid decline. I struggled to absorb what I was reading. The dates matched perfectly. His diagnosis happened months before his disappearance. Everything I believed began to shift. Owen explained that my father became terrified of losing control over his own mind. More than anything else, he feared that I would remember him during the worst stages of the disease, rather than as the father who raised me. The explanation hurt because it felt believable. For years, I had imagined abandonment. Now I was being asked to consider sacrifice. Neither possibility felt easy. Then Owen revealed another detail. Many of the letters had been written after my father's condition worsened. Some were dictated during hospital visits. Others were completed with assistance from caregivers. He continued writing because communicating with me mattered deeply to him. The room suddenly felt smaller. Everything I thought I knew was unraveling. Finally, Owen reached into the folder and removed a single envelope. Unlike the others, this one had never been opened. My name appeared on the front in weak, uneven handwriting. He placed it carefully on the table between us. Then he looked directly at me. He said the answers I was searching for would not be found in assumptions, arguments, or old suspicions. They would be found inside that letter. I stared at the envelope while thunder rolled across the harbor. For the first time since discovering the box in the attic, I was no longer afraid of what my mother had hidden. I was afraid of what I might have misunderstood all along. I stared at the envelope while rain struck the windows and thunder echoed across the harbor. The storm had dominated the entire night, but for the first time, it felt distant. My attention remained fixed on the fragile piece of paper resting in front of me. With careful hands, I opened it. The letter inside was shorter than I expected. The handwriting looked weaker than the other letters I had read. Some words leaned unevenly across the page, as though each sentence required effort. Still, every line carried my father's voice. He began by explaining that if I was reading the letter, it meant enough time had passed for difficult truths to be understood. He wrote about his illness with a level of honesty that surprised me. There was no attempt to sound brave or strong. Instead, he described the fear of slowly losing parts of himself. He wrote about forgetting familiar places. He wrote about struggling to remember conversations. Most painfully, he wrote about the possibility of one day forgetting me. As I continued reading, my chest tightened. For years, I had imagined my father making a selfish choice. I had pictured a man who abandoned his family because he wanted another life. The person described in this letter was completely different. He sounded frightened, confused, and desperate to protect the people he loved. Then I reached the section that changed everything. My father explained that my mother had opposed his decision from the beginning. She wanted him to stay. She wanted me to know the truth. She believed families should face hardship together, no matter how painful the circumstances became. I read those lines twice, then I read them again. The meaning never changed. The story I had built inside my head began collapsing piece by piece. My mother had not hidden the truth because she wanted control. She had hidden it because she was honoring a promise made to a man she loved. According to the letter, my father believed that protecting my childhood memories mattered more than protecting his reputation. The realization hurt more than any lie could have. For weeks, I had accused my mother of betrayal. In reality, she had been carrying a burden that never belonged to her. The letter continued. My father admitted that he often questioned his decision after leaving. There were many nights when he wanted to return. There were many mornings when he regretted creating distance. Yet every time his condition worsened, his fears returned. Then I reached a paragraph that neither Owen nor my mother had mentioned. My father revealed that my mother wrote to him every year after he left. My eyes stopped moving across the page. I read the sentence again, and then again. According to him, she never stopped believing he would come home. She wrote letters describing my life, my achievements, and the person I was becoming. Sometimes she wrote only a few pages. Sometimes she wrote dozens. He kept every single one. The room blurred as tears filled my eyes. For years, I had mistaken silence for indifference. Meanwhile, my mother had spent years writing letters to a man who might never return. Learning often begins when we discover how incomplete our understanding has been. Listening is one of the most difficult skills people can develop because true listening requires patience. Many of us spend more time preparing our response than understanding the person speaking. I realized that my greatest mistake was not believing the wrong story. My greatest mistake was refusing to hear the full one. When I finished reading, neither Owen nor I spoke for several minutes. The storm outside had finally begun to weaken. Rain still fell across the harbor, but the violent wind was fading. I looked toward the dark water and understood something that had escaped me for years. The storm had not changed the truth. The truth had been waiting for years. The storm simply removed everything that prevented me from seeing it. The next morning, I returned home. The sky remained gray, but sunlight occasionally broke through the clouds. Fallen branches covered parts of the road, and puddles reflected patches of light. Everything looked damaged, yet strangely peaceful. My heart raced as I approached my mother's front door. This time, I was not carrying accusations. I was carrying regret. She opened the door before I knocked. The exhaustion on her face immediately reminded me of the argument we had shared only days earlier. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then I handed her the letter. She recognized it instantly. Tears appeared in her eyes before she even unfolded the page. I apologized first, not because I had questions, because I never allowed her to answer them. My mother listened quietly while I admitted every assumption I had made. I told her about my anger, my suspicions, and the conclusions I had reached without understanding the full story. When I finished, she embraced me. Years of distance seemed to disappear in that moment. Later that afternoon, she walked to a cabinet and removed a worn cardboard box. Inside were dozens of letters. Some were addressed to my father, others were addressed to me. None had ever been sent. She explained that writing became her way of surviving grief. Whenever memories became too heavy, she placed them on paper. For years, those letters carried conversations she could not have in real life. Together, we spent hours reading them. Some made us laugh, others made us cry. For the first time, I felt like I understood both of my parents completely. As evening approached, sunlight finally broke through the remaining clouds. I stood beside the window and watched the last traces of rain disappear. For 15 years, I believed a storm would eventually reveal my father's betrayal. Instead, it revealed my mother's love. The rain cleared the sky by morning, but something else cleared with it. I stopped chasing a version of the truth I had invented and finally accepted the one that had been waiting for me all along. The storm ended that morning, but the silence between my mother and me ended with it. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.